What does it take for your own family to make you feel like you don't belong? How much do you have to give before they finally acknowledge that you exist? I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself, I'd earn their respect. I was wrong. I don't even know why I answered the phone that day. Maybe because, despite everything, some part of me still wanted to believe they cared. That this year would be different. That after years of being the family's financial crutch, they might finally see me as more than just a walking ATM. It was my mother. Her voice was light, rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to make it sound casual. She started talking about Christmas Eve, about how it was going to be elevated this year, about how Ethan's new girlfriend was from an important family, the kind of people who mattered in their social circles. I already knew where this was going before she even got to the point. She didn't say it outright at first, just danced around the words. But the message was clear. Maybe it would be best if I didn't come this year. Maybe we could do something more casual another time, just me and them, away from the people they actually wanted to impress. I wasn't good enough to sit at their table, but I had been good enough to pay for their house renovations, to cover Ethan's endless failures, to fund the lifestyle they clung to so desperately. And that's when it hit me. No matter how much I gave, I would always be an embarrassment to them. This is a true story. If you want to hear how it all unfolded, hit subscribe and follow for more on Reddit True Vault. I used to think there was a moment, some specific event, that made my parents stop loving me. A switch that flipped, turning me from their son into something else. Something disposable. But now, looking back, I realized the truth. I never really had a chance. We weren't poor. Far from it. My family lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place where wealth wasn't just about money, but about status. It was the kind of town where the car you drove, the school you attended, and the clubs you belonged to mattered more than the kind of person you actually were. My father, Douglas Aldridge, thrived in that world. A financial consultant with a Rolodex full of the right names, he obsessed over appearances. My mother, Vivian, played the role of the perfect socialite, curating every aspect of our lives to fit the mold of an elite family. And then there was Ethan. Ethan was perfect. Or at least, that's what they wanted to believe. The golden child. The son with limitless potential, no matter how many times he screwed up. If he failed, it wasn't really a failure. It was just a setback. If he got in trouble at school, it was the teacher's fault. If he slacked off in sports, it was because the coach didn't know how to bring out his true talent. My parents bent over backward to make sure Ethan never faced consequences, never experienced failure. I was the opposite. I was the kid who was expected to figure it out on my own. The one who didn't need attention, or praise, or even basic kindness. It was just the way things were. Ethan was special. I was there. At least, that's how it felt. But there was a turning point. There was a moment when everything changed. I was 6. Ethan was 3. It happened at a family gathering. One of those summer parties where the adults drank expensive wine and bragged about their stock portfolios while the kids were left to entertain themselves. There was a pool. I don't remember everything. Just flashes. The sun glaring off the water. The sound of my mother's laugh, distant and carefree. Ethan running too close to the edge, and me, being 6, being careless, pushing him, maybe too hard, maybe just playing. And then the splash. The next thing I remember is screaming. My mother's. My father's. Mine. A blur of movement. Someone jumping in. Ethan pulled from the water, coughing, shivering, alive. But it didn't matter. To them, I had tried to kill him. I don't know what was said that night, but I know what happened after. The way my parents looked at me changed. The warmth in their voices disappeared. The patience, the affection, it was just gone. Ethan became more than just the golden child after that. He became untouchable, the fragile prince who had barely escaped death at the hands of his reckless older brother. And me? I became the problem they never wanted to deal with again. It wasn't instant. They didn't start treating me like a stranger overnight. It was slower than that. More insidious. My father's disappointment turned to indifference. My mother's coldness became second nature. When I brought home a good grade, they barely acknowledged it. When Ethan scraped by with CS, they threw a celebration dinner. If I won an award, they'd say, "Good job." If Ethan showed up to an event, he was destined for greatness. And the worst part? Ethan knew. He knew he could get away with anything. That no matter what he did, no matter how many times he failed, our parents would always have his back. And he loved it. He would smirk when they ignored me at the dinner table. He would rub it in when they lavished him with praise. I spent years trying to fix it, trying to prove to them that I wasn't the bad son. that I was worth something, that I deserved their love, too. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. I knew they were going to be mad. I just didn't realize how much. My entire life, my parents had planned my future for me. It was never a discussion. It was a script, one I was expected to follow without question. UC Berkeley was supposed to be my next step. Not because I wanted it, but because they did. Because it was prestigious. Because it fit their narrative. Because it was where a son of the Aldridge family belonged. I didn't care. I had spent years trying to be the son they wanted. Years chasing approval that never came. And I was done. So, when I told them I had turned down UC Berkeley and taken a job in Wyoming, I expected the disappointment. The anger. The arguments. But nothing prepared me for the sheer disgust in their eyes. My father barely let me finish my sentence before cutting me off, his voice sharp and cold. Mining. He acted like I had just announced I was running off to join a circus. Like I had chosen the most degrading, shameful profession imaginable. Did I even know what I was throwing away? Did I understand what this would do to our family's reputation? Did I have any idea how hard they had worked to set me up for success? I had heard all these things before. But this time, I didn't let them sink in. I just stood there, listening, waiting. Ethan, of course, had to chime in. So you want to play in the dirt, huh? He was grinning like it was the funniest thing in the world. Like my entire existence was just a joke to him. I could have argued. I could have explained that this wasn't some impulsive decision, that I had thought about it, researched it, realized that the mining industry actually paid insanely well, that I wasn't throwing my future away. I was taking control of it for the first time in my life. But I didn't, because it wouldn't have mattered. So instead, I just said, yeah, and then I left. For the first time, I wasn't running toward their expectations. I was walking away from them. Wyoming was different. I arrived in the middle of winter, stepping off a bus into a world that felt like another planet. The sky was bigger here, the air sharper, the silence heavier. No perfectly landscaped lawns. No luxury cars humming down pristine streets. Just open space and an emptiness that made my chest feel both heavier and lighter at the same time. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. The first few weeks nearly broke me. The work was brutal, 12-hour shifts underground, breathing in dust so thick I could taste it. My hands, soft from years of being useless, blistered and bled within days. The cold seeped into my bones, and no amount of layers could fight it off. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache. And then there was the loneliness. I had spent years feeling like an outsider in my own home. But this was something else. I was completely alone. No friends. No family. Just me, a cramped apartment, and a silence so loud it felt suffocating. The worst part? I had no distractions. Back home, I could always find a way to bury the resentment, to pretend it didn't hurt, to convince myself that maybe, if I just worked harder, they would finally see me. But now, there was nothing between me and the truth. I sat in that apartment every night, staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. They didn't call. They didn't check in. Not even a fake, passive-aggressive text from my mom about how I would regret this someday. Nothing. I ate alone, worked alone, slept alone, and for the first time in my life, I had to accept the truth. They never loved me. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. But here's the thing about pain. If you push through it long enough, eventually, it stops feeling like suffering. The blisters turned to calluses. The aching muscles grew stronger. The exhaustion became routine. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized something. I liked it here, because for the first time in my life, I was earning something. Back home, nothing I did was ever enough. Every success was dismissed, every effort compared to Ethan's failures. But here, it didn't matter who my parents were. It didn't matter what school I got into, what connections I had, or what name was printed on my degree. The only thing that mattered was the work. I learned fast, moved up even faster. Within a year, I had certifications that took most guys 3 to get. 2 years in, I was promoted to supervisor. 3 years later, I was making more money than my father ever did. But the best part? I didn't know any of it to them. Everything I had built myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I should have seen it coming. I really should have. The moment my family found out I was making real money, I should have known what was going to happen next. But some stupid, desperate part of me, some part that still wanted to believe they actually gave a damn about me, let my guard down. And I paid for it. It started small. Just casual check-ins. At first, they felt harmless. Almost normal. It had been years since I'd left home. Years since I had last spoken to them in any meaningful way. So when my mother called out of the blue, I told myself that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. That maybe they had finally started to see me as my own person, not just the family disappointment. She asked how I was, how work was going, how I was settling into life so far away from them. The conversation was light, almost warm, something I hadn't felt from her in over a decade. And like an idiot, I let myself believe it was real. It wasn't, because not long after that first call, they started coming more frequently. At first, they were spaced out, every month, then every couple of weeks. Then suddenly, my phone was buzzing with their names more times in a single month than it had in the last 5 years combined. And then, the shift, the warmth faded. The questions changed. It stopped being about me and started being about them. Their house needed repairs. The roof was old, the kitchen outdated. It was embarrassing, they said, to host guests in such a worn-down home. I should have said no. I should have recognized it for what it was, a test. Because once you say yes the first time, it never stops there. I wired the money. And that was the beginning of the end. Because suddenly, they needed more. The renovations weren't enough. They wanted new furniture, then new landscaping, then a whole backyard overhaul. And each time, they framed it the same way, not as a demand, but as something any successful son would want to do for his family. And the worst part? I let it happen because some part of me, the part that had spent years craving even a scrap of their approval, wanted to believe that this was just what family did. That this was their way of showing they finally saw me as one of them. But I wasn't. I was their bank account, their personal ATM. And the more I gave, the more they expected. At some point, it stopped being about the house entirely. Ethan was launching a startup. He needed funding. And what kind of brother wouldn't support his siblings' dreams? Dad had a bad quarter at work. His firm was struggling, and he needed help covering some temporary expenses. Mom had her charity events, and she couldn't be seen pulling back her donations. What would people think? The list went on, and I, like a goddamn fool, kept paying. And what did I get in return? Nothing. No calls unless they needed something. No visits unless they had a business trip nearby. No invitations to family gatherings unless they needed someone to show off. It was never about me. It was never for me. It was about what I could provide, and I let them do it. For years, I convinced myself that this was normal, that this was family, that maybe, in their own twisted way, this was how they showed love. But then came Christmas, the moment that made me realize, beyond any doubt, that I would never be good enough for them, except for my money. And after that, everything changed. I should have known better. I should have known that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I tried, it would never be enough. But I still let myself believe. Christmas had always been a strange thing for me growing up. It was never about warmth or togetherness in our house. It was about presentation. Appearances. The perfectly decorated tree. The catered dinner that my mother pretended she made herself. The expensive gifts that were less about what we wanted and more about what would impress the extended family. But still, despite all that, I held on to this stupid, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. I had done everything right, at least as far as they were concerned. I had made something of myself. I had proven I was successful. I had given them everything they asked for without question. So when December rolled around and my mother called, I answered with something I hadn't felt in years: actual excitement. I didn't even get to say hello before she started talking. Her voice was clipped, careful, like she was trying to frame what she was about to say in the best possible way. Ethan had a new girlfriend, someone important, from a well-known family, and they were coming to Christmas Eve dinner. I remember nodding, about to tell her I was happy for him, when she kept going. She said it so casually, so effortlessly, like she was telling me the most obvious thing in the world. It's going to be an elegant evening. You understand, don't you? It's probably best if you don't come. At first, I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to repeat herself. She sighed, like I was the one making this difficult. Garrett, we just don't want to make things uncomfortable. Ethan's girlfriend's family, they're important people. You understand how these things work. And that was when it hit me. It didn't matter how much money I had given them. It didn't matter how much I had sacrificed. It didn't matter that I had spent years supporting them financially while they barely acknowledged my existence. I was still just me, the one they never wanted, the one who didn't belong. I felt my throat tighten, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. I had been so goddamn stupid. I had spent years letting them take from me, thinking that if I gave them enough, they'd finally let me back in, that they'd finally see me as part of the family. But they never would, because in their eyes, I was still that kid who didn't fit the mold. Still that 6-year-old who almost let their golden boy drown. still that failure who chose work boots over a suit and tie. I don't even remember how the call ended. I think I hung up first. And then, for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not because I was angry, not even because I was hurt, but because I was done. I had spent my entire life chasing something that was never going to exist. And in that moment, sitting alone in my apartment with my phone still in my shaking hands, I made a decision. I pulled up my banking app, and I cut them off. I knew it was coming. 3 days. That's how long it took for them to realize the money was gone. 3 days before the flood of missed calls, voicemails, and texts started rolling in. At first, I ignored them. I let the notifications pile up, one after another, watching as my father's name, then my mother's, then Ethan's flashed across my screen. It wasn't relief. Not yet. Just a strange, hollow sense of inevitability. Then, finally, curiosity won. I played the first voicemail. My father's voice, clipped and restrained, but vibrating with anger. I already knew what he would say before he said it. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Did something happen?" Just straight to the only thing that mattered to them. Mom was humiliated. That was the tragedy. Not the years of quiet, automatic bank transfers that had kept their debts at bay. Not the roof over their heads. The country club memberships. The endless cycle of new furniture and designer handbags that they pretended were modest luxuries. No, the issue was that she had gone to buy something, run her card, and, shockingly, been denied. It was never about me. It had never been about me. The next voicemail confirmed that. Mom, crying, playing the role she always did, switching seamlessly between victim and loving parent, whichever would manipulate me faster. Garrett, honey, this is ridiculous. You can't just cut us off like this. We're family. We need to talk. Family, that word. That fucking word. I didn't call her back. Then came Ethan. His texts were something else. Pure, unfiltered venom. Really? You think this makes you look powerful? Cutting off your own family? You think your dirt money means anything? You're still a joke, Garrett. Always have been. And that was the moment I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not sadness. Amusement. Because there it was. The truth. He wasn't mad that I cut them off. He wasn't mad that I had walked away. He was mad because he needed me. Because for the first time in his life, he might actually have to figure things out on his own. And that terrified him. I didn't reply. Then came the final call. Mom again. But this time, there was no performance. This time, her voice was sharp with desperation. We're going to lose everything, Garrett. Do you understand? Everything. The house, the cars, everything. If you don't help us, we won't survive this. I sat there, holding the phone in my hand, listening to her words fade into silence. And then I realized, really, truly realized, something I had never been able to accept before. It wasn't me they wanted. It was never me. It was what I could give. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. And for the first time, I felt free. After that, I threw myself into work. The weight I had carried for so long, the guilt, the obligation, it was gone. Without their constant demands, without the endless cycle of guilt tripping and manipulation, I found that I had more time, more energy, more clarity than ever before. I wasn't getting drained dry by a family that never saw me as anything but a resource. I was building something. I expanded my investments. I bought out a controlling stake in the mining company I had started at as a grunt worker. And for the first time, I built something that was truly mine. I wasn't just a paycheck anymore. I wasn't a lifeline for people who never saw me as anything more than a means to an end. I was free. Falling in love wasn't part of the plan. For the longest time, I didn't think it was possible. I had spent years believing I wasn't the kind of person people loved, just the kind they used, tolerated, maybe even relied on, but never really chose. And then I met Charlotte Monroe. But before I get into that, I need to talk about the person who made it happen, Mike. Mike was the closest thing I had to family. We met years ago, when I was still just another exhausted grunt worker in the mines, and somehow, despite my usual instinct to keep my distance from people, we clicked. Maybe it was because he didn't come from some privileged background like I did. Maybe it was because he never treated me like an outsider, never cared where I came from, never thought I was less than because I didn't fit into some country club ideal. When I cut my family off, Mike was the one who made sure I didn't fall into complete isolation. He never pushed, never asked me to talk about it unless I wanted to. But his family? They welcomed me like I had always been there. His wife, Sarah, would roll her eyes at my stubbornness and make sure I actually ate when I was working myself into the ground. Their kids treated me like some kind of cool uncle, constantly begging me to show them the big machines at work. And one day, out of nowhere, Sarah said, "Mike's cousin is moving out here for work. You should meet her. I shrugged it off at first. I wasn't interested in dating. I had just barely started to feel like I had a grip on my life again, and the last thing I needed was another person who could hurt me. But then I met her. Charlotte, Charlie, as she insisted everyone call her, was nothing like the women my family used to parade in front of me, the ones who only saw a last name, a bank account, a potential match that fit into their perfect little world. Charlie was real. The first thing she did when we met was comment on the rock formations near the site we were working on. Not polite small talk, not forced compliments. She was genuinely fascinated by them. And for the first time in my life, I met someone who actually gave a damn about what I did. Not because of the money, not because of how it looked, but because she respected it. She understood it. That first conversation stretched into an hour, then two, and I didn't feel the need to hold back. I told her about my work, the details most people found boring, the stuff that mattered to me. She listened. She asked questions. She challenged me in ways that didn't feel like judgment, but curiosity. And somewhere between explaining the logistics of mineral extraction and laughing at the way she absolutely tore apart some pompous academics' outdated theories, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Light. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of who I was supposed to be. I was just me, and she liked that version. The one who spent weekends working on old engines. The one who hated dress codes and small talk, but could talk for hours about something real. The one my family had spent years pretending didn't exist. Falling for her was easy. The hard part was believing it was real, because a small, broken part of me still thought it was only a matter of time before she saw what my family had seen. Someone not good enough. But Charlie never flinched. She never hesitated. When she found out about my past, she didn't pity me. She didn't act like I was some wounded animal she needed to fix. She just understood, because she had been there too. Her family hadn't wanted a geologist. They had wanted a lawyer, a doctor, something respectable. She had spent years fighting against expectations that never fit, just like me. And just like me, she had chosen to walk away. I think that's why I trusted her. Why? For the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have something more than survival. Maybe I could have someone who actually saw me. And when I finally let my guard down, when I finally let myself believe, I realized something even crazier. I wasn't alone anymore. I had spent my whole life trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it. But I didn't have to do that with her. She already saw it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn love. I just had it. A year. It had been a full year since I cut them off. 12 months of silence. 12 months of freedom. 12 months of waking up and not feeling like I owed anyone anything. And then, out of nowhere, I got the call. I don't know why I answered. Maybe some part of me was curious. Maybe I just wanted to hear how bad it had gotten. Because I knew it had gotten bad. I hadn't kept tabs on them, but word still had a way of reaching me. Ethan had finally run out of people to charm and investors to scam. His startup collapsed under lawsuits, and last I heard, he was facing serious charges for fraud. Dad lost his job after some ethical violations came to light. Shady deals that had been quietly tolerated for years suddenly weren't so easy to sweep under the rug when the money stopped flowing. And Mom, well, without the safety net of my bank account, the house, the lifestyle, the whole carefully curated illusion, it was all gone. So when she called, I already knew what she wanted. She didn't ask how I was, didn't say she missed me, just got straight to the point. Your father and I are in Arizona. We'd like to see you for Thanksgiving. I should have hung up right there, but I didn't. Not because I wanted to reconcile. Not because I thought anything had changed, but because I wanted to see it. I wanted to look them in the eyes and hear them say it. Hear them finally admit what I had known all along. They never wanted me. They just wanted what I could give them. I met them at some mid-tier hotel restaurant in Tucson. I got there early, and when they walked in, I barely recognized them. Dad, who had once carried himself with that effortless confidence of a man who believed he was somebody, suddenly looked small. His posture had caved in. His clothes were a little too worn, a little too loose. Mom, who used to be immaculate, looked tired. Older. She wasn't wearing designer anymore. The jewelry was gone. Ethan, of course, wasn't there. Still in California, dealing with the consequences of his own actions. They sat down across from me, and for the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. They stumbled through pleasantries, but I didn't engage. I just waited. And then, finally, they got to the point. Things have been difficult. We're struggling. Your father's situation, Ethan's legal troubles. We just need a little help to get back on our feet. There it was. The same script. The same expectations. Like nothing had changed. Like the last year had never happened. I let them finish. Let them lay out their case, their excuses, their justifications. And then I said the one thing I knew would break them. No, I watched it land, watched the shock ripple across their faces, like they had genuinely never considered the possibility that I wouldn't cave. Garrett, Mom tried again, her voice soft, pleading. We're family. I almost laughed. Family. Where was that family when I was nothing but a paycheck to them? Where was that family when they made it clear I wasn't good enough to sit at their table? I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and gave them the last truth I would ever give them. You should probably just think of me as the heartless one, I said. It'll be easier than admitting that you only come looking for me when you need money. I stood up, pulled a few bills from my wallet, and tossed them onto the table. Enough for their drinks. Nothing more. And then I walked out. I didn't look back. Not this time. That night, I went home to my real family. Mike and Sarah had the whole house packed for Thanksgiving. Their kids were running around, stealing bites of pie before dinner. Charlotte was there, her hand slipping easily into mine when I walked through the door, like she had always been meant to be there. It was warm, loud, messy in the best way, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place. I just belonged, because family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up, the ones who choose you, again and again. And I had finally found mine. Garrett ended his post with a message. At first, he wrote just to get the weight off his chest, to scream into the void, to put his pain somewhere other than inside himself. But as the words poured out, as he watched strangers respond with their own stories, their own wounds, he realized something. He wasn't alone. And if someone out there needed to hear it, if someone needed permission to walk away, to put themselves first for the first time in their life, then maybe sharing his story meant something more. If you're reading this and it sounds familiar, he wrote, if you've spent your whole life trying to earn love that will never come, stop. Stop breaking yourself into pieces for people who wouldn't lift a finger for you. You are worth more than that. Walk away. There are people out there who will love you for you. You just have to give them the chance to find you. It's a story we've seen before. A story of being used, of being manipulated, of realizing that sometimes family isn't the people you were born to. It's the people who choose you. So tell us, what do you think? Have you ever had to walk away from family to find your own peace? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to hear more real stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Reddit True Vault. Because sometimes, the truth is the most powerful thing you have.